The key turned in the lock with a finality that Diana Hartwell had long since learned not to protest. "Not a sound," Lady Margaret hissed through the heavy oak door. "If His Grace hears so much as a whisper from this attic, I shall ensure you regret it for months to come." Diana pressed her palm against the worn wood, feeling the vibration of her mother's footsteps retreating down the servants' stairs. 23 years of life, and 16 of them had been spent mastering the art of silence, of smallness, of existing in the negative spaces of Hartwell Manor, where her presence might not offend or embarrass. She crossed to the narrow window, its glass rippled with age, and watched the drive below. The Duke of Ashford's carriage rolled into view, a magnificent equipage of midnight blue lacquer trimmed in silver, drawn by 4 matched greys that moved with the precision of a military regiment. Even from this height, even through imperfect glass, Diana could see the coat of arms emblazoned on the door. A black raven clutching a sword, wings spread in eternal defiance. She raised her fingers to her left cheek, tracing the familiar ridge of scar tissue that ran from the corner of her eye to her cheekbone. A riding accident at 8 years old. A spooked horse, a low-hanging branch, and the end of Lady Margaret Hartwell's social ambitions for her eldest daughter. The physician had saved her eye, her life, but not her future. Not in her mother's estimation. Below, a tall figure emerged from the carriage. Even at this distance, Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, commanded attention. Broad-shouldered and moving with controlled grace, he surveyed Hartwell Manor with the assessing gaze of a man accustomed to evaluating fortifications and weaknesses. A veteran of the Peninsular Campaign, if the rumors were true. A man who had buried his younger brother at Waterloo and returned to England with shadows in his eyes and no patience for society's frivolities. Diana wondered what had brought such a man to their modest estate. The Hartwells possessed neither significant wealth nor noteworthy connections. Unless... Her breath caught. Rosalind. Beautiful, unmarred Rosalind, 19 and perfect, with golden curls and porcelain skin and none of the inconvenient intelligence that made Diana so unsuitable for polite conversation. Lady Margaret had been planning this for months, she realized. Every new gown for Rosalind, every deportment lesson, every carefully orchestrated mention of the Duke's return to society. And Diana, as always, was to be the family secret locked away in the attic. She watched until the Duke disappeared into the manor, then settled herself on the narrow cot in the corner. Mrs. Beatrice Dawson, the only person in this house who had shown her consistent kindness, had smuggled up a book yesterday, a worn copy of Milton's Paradise Lost. Diana opened it to a marked passage, but the words blurred before her eyes. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. She had long since made peace with her particular hell. What was one more day of invisibility? In the drawing room below, Lady Margaret Hartwell orchestrated her performance with the precision of a general commanding troops. "Your Grace, may I present our daughter, Miss Rosalind Hartwell." She positioned Rosalind before the Duke like a prize mare on display. "Rosalind, this is His Grace, the Duke of Ashford." Adrian Blackwood accepted Rosalind's curtsy with practiced courtesy, but his attention had already begun to wander. The drawing room bore the marks of genteel poverty disguised by careful arrangement. Good furniture, but worn. Paintings of quality, but faded. Everything positioned to hide the threadbare patches in the carpet. He had seen such tactical deception on battlefields, where desperate commanders arranged corpses to make their forces appear stronger than they were. "A pleasure, Miss Hartwell." He studied the young woman before him. Pretty, certainly. Perfectly presented. And utterly, crushingly dull in the way of women who had been taught to reflect rather than illuminate. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Your Grace," Rosalind murmured, her voice pitched to that particular register of feminine deference that Adrian had learned to despise. We are so honored by your visit. Indeed, Lady Margaret interjected, guiding them toward the seating arrangement she had clearly orchestrated in advance. We receive so few distinguished visitors here in the country. Your presence quite overwhelms us. Adrian allowed himself to be positioned on the settee, accepted tea from a servant, and endured the first 15 minutes of carefully banal conversation about the weather, the roads, the upcoming season in London. Rosalind performed her lines with the mechanical precision of an actress in a long-running play. Lady Margaret prompted and guided, a puppeteer managing strings. Lord Hartwell, a faded man who seemed to exist primarily as furniture in his own home, offered occasional monosyllables from his chair by the window. It was during a particularly tedious monologue from Lady Margaret about Rosalind's accomplishments on the pianoforte that Adrian's gaze fell upon the portrait above the mantelpiece. Two girls, painted perhaps 15 years ago. One golden-haired and cherubic, the other dark-haired and solemn, with striking gray eyes that seemed to follow the viewer. Sisters, clearly. Similar enough in feature to be unmistakable. Different enough in coloring to be distinctive. "A lovely portrait," he interrupted Lady Margaret mid-sentence. "Your daughters, I presume?" The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. "A very old painting, Your Grace," Lady Margaret recovered with admirable speed. "From childhood. Hardly relevant." "Mrs. Dawson," Lord Hartwell called suddenly, his voice sharp with warning as the governess entered with fresh tea. "Kindly remember that we are entertaining His Grace. No need for your usual chatter." The elderly woman, who had begun to say something about the girls, closed her mouth with an audible snap. But not before Adrian caught the slip, the plural where there should have been singular. He set down his teacup with deliberate care. "Forgive me, but am I to understand you have another daughter, Lady Margaret?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. "We did," Lady Margaret said finally, her voice tight. "She is indisposed, quite unwell, rarely leaves her chambers." The lie emerged smooth and practiced, refined by years of repetition. "I see." Adrian rose, moving to examine the portrait more closely. The dark-haired girl gazed back at him with an expression he recognized. The look of someone who saw too much and revealed too little. A survivor's eyes. "How unfortunate. I hope her condition is not serious." "A chronic ailment, Your Grace. Nothing contagious, I assure you, but delicate. We find it best not to strain her constitution with social demands." "Of course." He turned back to face them, and something in his expression made Lady Margaret's smile falter. Adrian Blackwood had learned to read terrain, to spot concealed positions, to sense when enemy forces were not where they claimed to be. And every instinct honed through years of warfare told him that this family was hiding something far more significant than an invalid daughter. "Perhaps a tour of your gardens? I find I have spent too much time in carriages of late. Fresh air would be welcome." Lady Margaret seized the opportunity to redirect. "Rosalind would be delighted to show you the grounds, Your Grace. She has quite transformed our rose garden." Adrian allowed himself to be led outside, Rosalind's hand light on his arm, her practiced commentary about horticulture washing over him like meaningless noise. But his mind remained fixed on that portrait, on the slip of the tongue, on the excessive care with which this family had arranged their presentation. He had not survived 5 years of war by accepting the battlefield as it appeared. There was always another position, another force, another truth hidden just beyond the obvious line of engagement. And Adrian Blackwood had every intention of discovering exactly what, or whom, the Hartwells were so desperate to hide. Diana woke before dawn, as she always did. The household stirred earliest in the servants' quarters, but here in her attic exile, she had learned to move through Hartwell Manor like a ghost in the hours before her family rose. It was the only time the house felt like hers, the only time she could walk its halls without fear of encountering her mother's disgust or her father's avoidance. She dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing her oldest morning dress, and descended the servants' stairs with practiced silence. Mrs. Dawson had left the kitchen door unlocked, as she always did. A small rebellion, a tiny gift of freedom. The morning air struck her face like a blessing. Diana crossed the dew-wet lawn, toward the small wilderness garden at the eastern edge of the property, where the landscaping gave way to wild growth and ancient oaks. Here, in this neglected corner, she had created her sanctuary. The birds knew her. As she approached, scattering seeds from the pocket of her dress, they descended in a flutter of wings, robins and finches, the occasional brave crow. She had named some of them, foolish as that was. This one with the damaged wing she called Milton, after the blind poet. That one with unusual white markings was Dante, because he always returned no matter how far he flew. "Good morning," she murmured, watching them feast. "I hope you slept better than I did. They seem quite fond of you." Diana's heart stopped. She spun, and there he was, the Duke of Ashford, emerging from the path that led from the main house, dressed for riding in buckskin breeches and a coat of dark superfine. The rising sun caught the sharp planes of his face, illuminating features that were striking rather than handsome. A strong nose, a firm jaw, and eyes of such startling blue they seemed almost unnatural. Those eyes were fixed on her face, not politely averted, not sliding tactfully away from the left side where her scar caught the morning light. Simply looking. Diana's hand rose instinctively to her cheek, her body angling to present her unmarred right profile. Movements so ingrained she no longer thought about them. "Forgive me," the Duke said, his voice carrying a roughness that suggested he had not yet taken his morning tea. "I did not mean to startle you. I am Adrian Blackwood." "I know who you are, Your Grace." Diana executed a proper curtsy despite the racing of her heart, despite the humiliation of being discovered like this, feeding birds in the garden like a peculiar child. "I am Diana Hartwell." "Ah." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. The elder Miss Hartwell, the one who is chronically indisposed. Heat flooded her cheeks, so her mother's lie had been that transparent. "I am feeling remarkably well this morning, Your Grace." "So I observe." He moved closer, and Diana forced herself not to retreat, though every instinct screamed to flee. He would see her clearly now, the full extent of the damage that made her unfit for drawing rooms and dinner parties. "I wonder, is your indisposition of the sort that conveniently manifests when dukes come to call?" The directness of the question shocked a surprised laugh from her throat before she could stop it. "Your Grace speaks with unusual frankness. I survived 5 years of war by learning to dispense with polite fictions, Miss Hartwell. They have a way of getting men killed." He glanced at the birds, still pecking at the scattered seeds, then back to her. "Why were you locked away yesterday?" Diana's breath caught. Not hidden, not kept upstairs, not indisposed. Locked away. As if he had somehow known, had somehow seen through every careful lie. "My mother believed," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "that my presence might prove distracting during your visit." Distracting. He repeated the word as if tasting it, finding it wanting. "Because of that?" He gestured toward her face, casual as one might indicate an interesting architectural feature. The casual acknowledgement, the utter lack of either pity or revulsion, disarmed her more thoroughly than any courtly pretense could have done. "Among other reasons, yes." "May I?" He gestured toward the scar, and when she gave a hesitant nod, he stepped closer still. studying it with the detached interest of a physician, or a soldier accustomed to cataloging wounds. A riding accident? When I was 8. A branch caught me when my horse bolted. You were fortunate. Another inch and you might have lost the eye. So the physician informed my mother. She did not consider me particularly fortunate. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then your mother is a fool. The blunt declaration, delivered in that matter-of-fact tone, struck Diana with the force of a physical blow. In 16 years, no one, not even kind Mrs. Dawson, had dared to speak against Lady Margaret's judgment. To hear a duke dismiss her mother's worldview so casually left Diana momentarily speechless. Scars tell stories of survival, he continued, his voice softening slightly. Yours tells me you are stronger than they know. Stronger, perhaps, than you know. Diana found her voice, though it emerged rough with emotions she could not quite name. You are very kind, Your Grace, but I am not kind. He cut her off, but without rudeness. I am honest. There is a difference. Kindness implies charity. Honesty is simply the acknowledgement of what is true. The birds had finished their breakfast and begun to disperse, save for Milton, who hopped closer to Diana's feet with the boldness of long familiarity. She crouched to offer him a final seed, grateful for the excuse to break eye contact with the Duke, whose intensity was becoming difficult to bear. Why are you here, Your Grace? She asked the question to Milton rather than to the man towering above her. Hartwell Manor is hardly on the route to anywhere significant, and my family has no particular connection to recommend us to your notice. I am here, he said, because I am tired of London, tired of mothers presenting perfect daughters like merchandise at a market, tired of conversations that mean nothing and conceal everything. He paused. And now I am here because I have met a woman who feeds birds at dawn and speaks to dukes without simpering. Diana rose, brushing seeds from her hands, and finally met his gaze. I suspect your visit has more to do with my sister than with me, Your Grace. Rosalind is everything a gentleman could wish for in a wife. Rosalind is a beautifully crafted automaton designed to please, he said bluntly. I have no interest in marrying a woman whose every word has been rehearsed, whose every gesture has been choreographed to secure a proposal. Then I fear you will find few options among the ton, Your Grace. We are all performing, in one way or another. Are you? Performing? The question hung between them, weighted with more significance than its simple words suggested. Diana considered lying, offering some self-deprecating deflection that would send him back to the house, back to Rosalind, back to the carefully arranged fiction her family had constructed. Instead, she found herself answering with the same uncomfortable honesty he had offered her. No, I have no audience to perform for. I am simply here, existing in the margins while others take the stage. Then perhaps, Adrian Blackwood said, his eyes never leaving hers, it is time someone noticed the margins. He bowed, a gesture of respect between equals rather than a duke condescending to a country spinster, and turned back toward the house. Diana watched him go, her heart doing strange, erratic things in her chest, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. A duke had seen her scar, had acknowledged it directly, and had not flinched, had not pitied, had called her mother a fool and suggested that survival was strength. Diana sank onto the garden bench, her knees suddenly unreliable. Milton hopped onto the seat beside her, and she stroked his damaged wing with one trembling finger. I think, she whispered to the bird, that something impossible just happened. Milton chirped his agreement, and the sun continued its inexorable rise over Hartwell Manor. By the time Adrian reached the house, his decision was made. He found Lord Hartwell in the breakfast room, hiding behind yesterday's newspaper with the desperate air of a man hoping to be overlooked. Lady Margaret had not yet descended, a tactical error on her part. Adrian had learned that early morning attacks, before the enemy had fully mobilized, often proved most effective. Lord Hartwell. Adrian settled himself at the table uninvited, accepting coffee from a startled servant. I require a word. The newspaper lowered with visible reluctance. Your Grace, I trust you slept well? Adequately. Adrian sipped his coffee, letting silence do its work. Hartwell shifted in his chair, the newspaper crumpling in his grip. I had a most interesting encounter this morning, with your daughter Diana. All color drained from Hartwell's face. Your Grace, I must apologize. My wife explicitly instructed. That is to say, Diana was not meant to trouble you. Trouble me? Adrian set down his cup with enough force to make it clink against the saucer. Why would your daughter's presence trouble me? Well, that is, surely you saw. Hartwell gestured vaguely at his own face, as if unable to speak the words aloud. I saw a woman of obvious intelligence engaged in a perfectly reasonable morning activity. I also saw a scar that speaks to a childhood accident, nothing more. What I fail to see is why such a woman would be hidden away like some shameful secret. Lady Margaret feels, that is, society expects. Hartwell's voice trailed into miserable silence. Adrian leaned forward, letting his military bearing fill the space between them. Let me be extraordinarily clear, Lord Hartwell. I have come to your home with the intention of finding a wife. Yesterday, your family presented Miss Rosalind as your only daughter. Today, I have discovered Miss Diana. I should like to spend time with both young ladies before making any determination. Do you object? Object? To a duke? No, Your Grace, certainly not, but Lady Margaret will object strenuously. Yes, I anticipated as much. Adrian rose, his height and bearing making the breakfast room feel suddenly cramped. I am informing you as a courtesy, Lord Hartwell, not requesting permission. I will be in the blue drawing room in 1 hour. I expect Miss Diana to join me there. Send Mrs. Dawson as chaperone if you must, but your daughter will not be locked away again while I am under this roof. Am I understood? Hartwell nodded, his newspaper forgotten, his breakfast cooling on the plate before him. Excellent. Adrian strode from the room, leaving chaos in his wake. Diana was summoned from her attic with the sort of urgency typically reserved for house fires. Quickly now, Miss Diana, Mrs. Dawson urged, breathless from climbing the stairs. His Grace has requested your presence. Your mother is in an absolute fury, but your father has insisted you comply. His Grace requested... Diana could not finish the sentence. It seemed too improbable, too dangerous to speak aloud. Indeed. Come, we must make you presentable. Your mother forbids any of the good dresses, but I've set aside your blue morning gown. It's not fashionable, but it's clean and well made, and it brings out your eyes. 20 minutes later, Diana descended to the blue drawing room on trembling legs, Mrs. Dawson a reassuring presence behind her. The Duke stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, gazing out over the gardens where they had met at dawn. He turned as she entered, and his expression, warm with something that might have been approval, steadied her nerves. Miss Hartwell, thank you for joining me. He gestured to the chairs arranged before the fireplace. Please sit. I thought we might continue the conversation we began this morning. Diana sat, acutely aware of her too simple dress, her uncurled hair, the scar that seemed to burn under his gaze. Mrs. Dawson settled into a corner chair with her needlework, the ideal chaperone, present but unobtrusive. Your Grace wished to speak with me? Diana folded her hands in her lap to still their shaking. I did. Adrian took the chair opposite her, close enough for conversation, but not so close as to be improper. I find myself curious about you, Miss Hartwell. a dangerous condition for a man who prides himself on careful reasoning. Curiosity about me seems inefficient. My sister would be a far more rewarding subject of study. Would she? His blue eyes held hers with unnerving steadiness. Tell me, Miss Hartwell, what do you read? The question caught her off guard. Read? This morning you mentioned existing in the margins. I suspect someone who frames her life in such terms has spent considerable time with books. So I ask again, what do you read? Diana hesitated, then decided that if he wanted honesty, she would provide it. Everything I can acquire. Poetry, mostly. Milton, Wordsworth. Byron, though my mother would be scandalized to know I have his works. History. Philosophy when Mrs. Dawson can smuggle volumes from your father's library without detection. Byron. A smile ghosted across his face. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know. What draws you to him? He writes as if pain is not something to be hidden or denied. As if it is simply another part of the human experience, no more shameful than joy. Diana found herself relaxing slightly, drawn into the familiar comfort of discussing books. He does not pretend that the world is kind. No, Adrian agreed quietly. He does not. Have you read his poems about Greece, about war? The Isles of Greece, where burning Sappho loved and sung. Diana quoted from memory. I have. They are beautiful and terrible in equal measure. That is war. Adrian's voice roughened. Beautiful and terrible. Young men marching to glory, dying in mud. Causes that seem righteous until you see what they cost. He paused, and Diana saw shadows move behind his eyes. I lost my brother at Waterloo. Thomas was 22. He died because I gave the order to hold a position that could not be held. The rawness of the confession struck Diana like a blow. This was not polite conversation, not drawing room patter. This was grief, laid bare. I am so sorry, Your Grace. The words felt inadequate, but she offered them anyway, infusing them with genuine feeling. What a terrible burden to carry. It is. But here is what I have learned from carrying it. Beauty matters more when you have seen ugliness. Truth matters more when you have lived with lies. And I have very little patience left for the elaborate fictions that society constructs. He leaned forward slightly. So tell me truthfully, Miss Hartwell, what is it like? Being hidden. Being treated as if your existence is something to be ashamed of. No one had ever asked her that. Not in 16 years. Not with such direct, unflinching interest. It is like being a ghost, Diana heard herself say. Present but unseen. Moving through your own life as if you have no claim to it. Watching others take the space you might have occupied, if only you had been born different. Born perfect. Perfection is a lie, Adrian said flatly. It is what people pretend to be when they are too afraid to reveal what they are. Give me scarred honesty over flawless deception any day. Your Grace speaks of things most people spend their lives avoiding. Most people have not watched their brother die in their arms. Most people have not had to write letters to grieving parents, explaining why their sons are not coming home. Once you have done those things, pretending that the weather is fascinating seems obscene. Diana found herself smiling despite the gravity of his words. I suspect you are not popular at London dinner parties. I am decidedly unpopular. I make people uncomfortable. I ask questions they do not wish to answer. I refuse to pretend that their petty concerns matter when I have seen actual suffering. He smiled back, a quick flash of humor that transformed his severe features. You, however, do not seem uncomfortable. I am accustomed to discomfort, Your Grace. It is my natural habitat. Then perhaps we are well matched in our mutual unsuitability for polite society. The words hung between them, weighted with implication. Diana's heart beat too fast, her breath too shallow. This could not be happening. Dukes did not sit in drawing rooms discussing philosophy and pain with scarred spinsters. They did not look at women like Diana as if they were actual people rather than problems to be solved or mistakes to be hidden. "Why are you here?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "Truly, Your Grace. My family has nothing to offer you. Rosalind is beautiful, but she is not sophisticated. Our connections are mediocre. Our fortune is modest. And I am—" "You are what?" "I am unmarriageable. My mother made that clear years ago. No dowry is large enough to overcome." She gestured to her face, unable to say the words. Adrian rose abruptly, and Diana feared she had offended him. But he simply crossed to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines until he found what he sought, a slim volume bound in green leather. He returned, placing it in her hands. "Read the inscription." Diana opened the book. "For Adrian, who survived when I could not. Make it mean something. Thomas." My brother gave me that a week before Waterloo. He knew, I think, that he would not survive. He was always too gentle for war, too trusting. He believed that honor and courage would be enough. Adrian's voice roughened. He was wrong. But he was not wrong about this. Survival must mean something. It cannot simply be endurance. It must become purpose. "I do not understand what this has to do with—" "You survived, Miss Hartwell. An accident that could have killed you, yes, but also 16 years of systematic cruelty from your own family. You wake at dawn to feed birds. You read Byron and Milton. You have maintained your humanity in an environment designed to crush it. That is not unmarriageable. That is remarkable." Tears burned behind Diana's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to dissolve into sentiment. But his words had struck something deep and unhealed within her. "Your Grace flatters me. I do not flatter. I observe. I assess. And what I see before me is a woman of considerable strength masquerading as an apology." He returned to his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. "I am not here for Rosalind. I am not here because your family has anything to offer me. I am here because I am tired of pretense, and you are the first person I have met in a year who does not traffic in it. You cannot possibly— This is madness, Your Grace. You have known me for hours. I knew my brother for 22 years, and I did not truly see him until I read his final letter. Sometimes recognition is instant. Sometimes you simply know." The door opened, and Lady Margaret swept in like an advancing storm, Rosalind trailing in her wake. "Your Grace," Lady Margaret's voice dripped false sweetness laced with barely concealed fury. "How delightful that you have taken an interest in Diana. She so rarely has the opportunity for conversation. But I am certain you must be weary of her limited society. Rosalind has been waiting to show you our rose gardens." "Actually," Adrian interrupted, rising with the sort of cold courtesy that could cut glass, "I have requested that Miss Diana join me for a drive this afternoon. With Mrs. Dawson as chaperone, naturally. I trust that meets with your approval, Lady Margaret?" The silence that followed could have frozen fire. "A drive. With Diana." Lady Margaret's smile had become a rictus of forced civility. How extraordinarily unconventional. "I am an unconventional man." Adrian's tone suggested he was done asking permission. "Shall we say 2 o'clock, Miss Hartwell?" Diana, caught between terror and exhilaration, managed a nod. 2 o'clock, Your Grace." As Adrian left the room, Diana caught her mother's expression, a mix of fury and calculation that promised retribution. But for the first time in 16 years, Diana found she did not care. Let her mother rage. Let society whisper. For 3 hours this afternoon, she would ride in a duke's carriage, and she would not apologize for existing. The drive became 3 drives. 3 drives became daily visits. Daily visits became 2 weeks of the most extraordinary courtship Diana could never have imagined. Adrian brought her books, a complete set of Wordsworth's poems, a volume of Greek philosophy, a treatise on natural history that he thought she might enjoy. They discussed everything from the proper regulation of agricultural commons to whether Shakespeare's tragedies were more affecting than his comedies. He asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers, debating points with the seriousness of a scholar rather than the condescension of a man humoring a woman. He took her to the stables and taught her to approach the horses again, to shed the fear she had carried since her accident. When she trembled, he stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, until she could run her hand down the velvet nose of his stallion without flinching. But the outside world intruded with increasing viciousness. The whispers started in the village. Diana heard them when she accompanied Mrs. Dawson to purchase thread. 2 women outside the draper's shop, their voices pitched to Carrie. The Duke and the scarred Hartwell girl, can you imagine? Perhaps he has poor eyesight, or perhaps he is conducting some sort of charitable exercise. The aristocracy does have peculiar notions about good works. More likely he is simply eccentric. War does strange things to men's minds. My cousin says he is quite odd in London, refuses to dance, insults hostesses. Diana had walked away, burning with humiliation, but also with a dangerous question. Was that why he wanted her? Eccentricity? A peculiar desire to shock society by choosing the unsuitable daughter? Lady Margaret fed those doubts with surgical precision. How generous of his grace to pay you such attention, she murmured one evening after Adrian had departed. Though one does wonder at his true motives. The Duke is known for his unconventional behavior. Perhaps you are simply his latest crusade, the poor, scarred daughter rescued by the noble war hero. How very romantic. Until he grows bored, of course. The poison sank deep. By the 3rd week, Diana's doubts had grown into choking vines that wrapped around her heart. She watched Adrian arrive for their daily visit, and instead of joy, she felt creeping dread. How long before he realized his mistake? How long before the novelty of her strangeness wore thin, and he returned to London to find a proper wife? She confronted him during a walk through the gardens, their gardens, where they had first met. Why? The word burst from her without warning. Why me, Your Grace? Please do not speak to me of strength or survival or seeing who I truly am. I need the truth. Am I a charity case? An amusement? A way to rebel against your family's expectations? Adrian stopped walking, his expression hardening into something dangerous. You believe I am toying with you. I believe I do not understand why a duke would choose a scarred spinster when he could have anyone. Beautiful, accomplished, perfect anyone. Her voice broke on the last word. I believe my mother is right. I am your crusade. Your project. The damaged woman you can rescue to assuage your guilt over Thomas. The words hung between them, ugly and raw. Adrian's jaw worked, emotion flickering behind his eyes. Hurt, then anger, then something like grim determination. Is that truly what you believe? His voice was dangerously quiet. That I have spent 3 weeks courting you, bringing you books, learning your thoughts, because I need a project? What else am I to believe? You have known me less than a month. You barely know me at all. I know that you rise before dawn to feed birds with broken wings. I know that you cry when you read about Dido's betrayal in the Aeneid. I know that you have read agricultural reform papers and have opinions about crop rotation that most members of Parliament lack. I know that you are terrified of horses, but approached my stallion anyway because I asked you to trust me. I know that you laugh at bawdy jokes when you forget to be proper. I know that you see the world exactly as it is and refuse to pretend otherwise." He stepped closer, and Diana saw something fierce burning in his eyes. "You want to know why I want you? Because you are the only woman I have ever met who sees me. Not my title, not my wealth, not the war hero society expects. You see Adrian Blackwood, a man who failed his brother, who despises pretense, who is so goddamn tired of performing for people who would not recognize truth if it struck them in the face. And you do not ask me to be anyone other than who I am. Your Grace—" "I will wait," he interrupted, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "I will give you time to believe that I am not deceiving you, that this is not charity or eccentricity or crusade. But know this, Miss Hartwell, I have never wanted anything or anyone as I want you, and I have survived too much to settle for anything less than absolute truth in the one relationship that will define the rest of my life. So take your time. Question everything. But do not insult us both by pretending that what we have is ordinary or insignificant or some sort of elaborate fiction." He bowed, turned on his heel, and strode from the garden, leaving Diana standing alone among the roses. Mrs. Dawson found her there an hour later, still frozen in place, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my dear girl," the old woman murmured, wrapping a shawl around Diana's shoulders. "What has happened?" "I think," Diana whispered, "I have just broken something I desperately wanted to keep whole." 2 weeks of silence followed. No visits, no books delivered by servants, no messages. Diana had asked for time, and Adrian had given it to her. All of it. An endless expanse of empty days that stretched into lonely nights. Lady Margaret moved with renewed confidence, sensing victory. Rosalind was paraded before other eligible gentlemen who came to call. Lesser titles, certainly, but attainable ones. The Duke of Ashford, her mother proclaimed to anyone who would listen, had proven to be exactly as eccentric as rumored. His brief fascination with Diana had been nothing more than aristocratic whimsy. Diana retreated into her attic, into her books, into the terrible certainty that she had destroyed the one genuine thing that had ever happened to her. She replayed their last conversation endlessly, hearing the hurt beneath his anger, the vulnerability he had shown her. "I have never wanted anything, or anyone, as I want you." She had called it a lie. She had questioned his motives, his sincerity, his very character. And why? Because she could not believe that someone might want her. Because 16 years of her mother's poison had sunk so deep that even when offered genuine love, she could only see deception. Mrs. Dawson found her on the 14th morning of silence, staring out the attic window at nothing. "This arrived for you, Miss Diana." The old woman held out a cream envelope, sealed with the Ashford crest. "It was addressed specifically to you." Diana's hands shook as she broke the seal. "Miss Hartwell, I am hosting a ball at Ashford Hall in London 1 week hence, honoring veterans of the Peninsular Campaign and Waterloo. I should be honored if you would attend. I am enclosing a second invitation for your family, as propriety demands. But this invitation is for you alone. Come, or do not come, but know that I will be watching for you." A. Blackwood tucked inside was a second formal invitation addressed to Lord and Lady Hartwell and family. "He sent 2 invitations," Diana breathed. "One for me specifically." "So he did," Mrs. Dawson smiled. "The question is, my dear, what will you do about it?" Lady Margaret's rage was a living thing. "Absolutely not. Diana will not attend. It is bad enough that His Grace extended such an invitation after abandoning his suit. I will not have her embarrass this family further by appearing in London society. Rosalind and I shall attend. Diana will remain here. But this time, Lord Hartwell surprised them all. Diana will attend. His voice, so rarely heard in decisions of consequence, cut through his wife's protests. His Grace specifically invited her. To refuse would be a direct insult to a duke. We cannot afford such an insult. But her appearance, her unsuitability, is apparently not His Grace's concern. Diana will attend. I have spoken. For once, Lady Margaret's machinations failed. She could not refuse a duke's direct invitation without causing a scandal that would damage Rosalind's prospects far more than Diana's presence ever could. The night of the ball arrived with terrifying speed. Lady Margaret sabotaged where she could. Diana's dress was the simplest possible, her hair dressed without ornament, her appearance calculated to fade into the background. As their carriage approached Ashford Hall, ablaze with lights and crawling with the finest carriages in London, Diana's courage nearly failed. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "I do not belong here." "You belong wherever you choose to be," Mrs. Dawson said firmly. The old woman had insisted on accompanying them, and for once, Lady Margaret had not argued. "His Grace invited you. Hold your head high." The ballroom was magnificent. Soaring ceilings, glittering chandeliers, hundreds of London's elite draped in silk and jewels and arrogance. Diana felt every eye turn toward her as they entered, felt the whispers ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. The scarred Hartwell girl. What is she doing here? The Duke invited her? How extraordinary. How bizarre. Lady Margaret and Rosalind were immediately absorbed into the crowd, leaving Diana standing alone at the edge of the ballroom, wishing desperately for the power of invisibility. And then she saw him. Adrian stood at the far end of the ballroom, magnificent in black evening dress, his military medals displayed across his chest. He was surrounded by admirers, beautiful women, important men, everyone vying for the attention of the Duke of Ashford. But his eyes were scanning the crowd, searching, and when they found her, everything else fell away. He moved, directly across the ballroom, ignoring everyone who tried to intercept him, his gaze locked on Diana with an intensity that made her breath catch. The crowd parted before him, conversations dying as people tracked his progress. He stopped before her, and the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "Miss Hartwell?" He bowed, a gesture of profound respect. "You came?" "You invited me, Your Grace." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I owed you an answer. Then perhaps we might discuss that answer somewhere more private?" He offered his arm, and Diana took it with trembling fingers. He led her through the crowd, not to a private room, but to the center of the ballroom itself. The orchestra had gone silent. Every eye in London society was fixed upon them. Diana's heart hammered against her ribs. "Your Grace, what are you—" "I am making a declaration," he said quietly, then raised his voice to carry across the ballroom. "My lords, ladies, honored guests, I require your attention." The silence became absolute. Tonight we gather to honor those who fought for England. Men who sacrificed, who bled, who died so that we might live in safety and prosperity. I lost my brother in that service. I watched friends fall. I learned what truly matters in this world, and what is merely performance and pretense. He turned to Diana, and his eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. "I present to you Miss Diana Hartwell, a woman who has demonstrated courage that puts most of this room to shame. A woman who survived an accident that could have killed her and carried the scar with dignity while her own family treated her as something to be hidden and ashamed of. A woman of extraordinary intelligence, fierce compassion, and unshakable integrity." Diana's vision blurred with tears. Around them, she could feel shock radiating from the crowd, hear the whispers beginning. Adrian drew a small velvet box from his pocket and dropped to one knee before her, before all of London society. "Miss Diana Hartwell." His voice roughened with emotion. "You asked me why I wanted you." Here is my answer, spoken before 300 witnesses so you might never doubt it again. I want you because you are brave enough to show me your scars. Because you read Milton and Byron and have opinions about agricultural reform. Because you feed birds with broken wings and you see the world as it truly is. Because in a life filled with performance and pretense, you are the only true thing I have found. You are the only woman worthy of my name, and I am honored, terrified, humbled, and honored that you might consider accepting it. He opened the box, revealing a ring of breathtaking simplicity, a single ruby surrounded by diamonds, the Blackwood family ring passed down through generations. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my truth in a world of lies? The ballroom had ceased to exist. There was only Adrian, on his knees before her, offering her everything she had never dared to dream of. But your grace, I cannot. The protests died on her lips, because she could see the truth in his eyes, could feel it in the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the ring. Why me? She whispered one final time. Because you see me as I am. Not my title, not my wealth. And I see you as you are, not your scar, not your family's cruelty. I see your strength, your kindness, your brilliant mind. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. I see the woman I love. The tears spilled over, and Diana realized they were not tears of pain, but of something so profound and overwhelming she had no name for it. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Your Grace. I will marry you. The ballroom erupted. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, rose and pulled her into his arms with a possessiveness that declared to every person watching, she is mine, and I am hers, and anyone who questions that will answer to me. He kissed her forehead, then her scarred cheek with deliberate tenderness, then finally her lips, a kiss that tasted of promise and vindication, and futures neither of them had dared to imagine. When they finally broke apart, Diana turned to face the ballroom. Where she had expected censure, she found something unexpected. Applause. Led by an elderly countess in the front rank, it spread through the crowd, perhaps not universal, but genuine enough. Society might whisper, but society would not dare oppose a duke who had made his choice so publicly, so irrevocably. Lady Margaret stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of shock. Rosalind beside her looked strangely relieved, as if a burden she had never asked for had been lifted. But Diana had no attention to spare for them. She was too busy being held by a man who had seen every broken part of her and called it beautiful. Too busy beginning to believe, finally, that she was worthy of being seen. "Shall we dance, my betrothed?" Adrian murmured, leading her toward the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. "I should warn you, I have never danced in public. I am likely to step on your feet. Then we shall be well matched, for I have spent 3 years avoiding ballrooms. We can be terrible together." And they were, not terrible at dancing as it turned out, but terrible at maintaining any awareness of the other couples on the floor. They danced as if alone, talking quietly, laughing, learning the shape of a future they would build together. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the chapel at Ashford Hall. It was a small ceremony by aristocratic standards. Only those who truly mattered. Mrs. Dawson wept openly. Lord Henry Carmichael stood as Adrian's witness, his war-scarred face creased with genuine joy for his friend. A handful of Adrian's military companions attended, men who understood what it meant to find something true in a world of deception. Lord and Lady Hartwell had been sent an invitation, as courtesy demanded. They did not attend. Diana found she did not mind. The people who had hidden her for 16 years had no place at the celebration of her emergence into light. She stood before Adrian in a gown of ivory silk, her hair dressed with small white roses, her scar visible to anyone who cared to look. And when the vicar asked if anyone objected to their union, the silence was absolute and affirming. I, Adrian Blackwood, take thee, Diana Hartwell. The vows seemed insufficient for what they were promising each other. Not just marriage, but recognition. Not just partnership, but understanding. Not just love, but the fierce commitment to see each other truly. Always, no matter how difficult that seeing became. When Adrian kissed her at the conclusion of the ceremony, he cupped her scarred cheek in his palm, his thumb tracing the familiar ridge of tissue as if it were something precious. "My Duchess," he murmured against her lips. "My Duke," she answered, and finally believed it. 3 months after the wedding, Diana hosted her first formal afternoon tea at Ashford Hall. But this was not the sort of tea the Tun expected. The guests were not society matrons or eligible young ladies, but young women like Diana had been. Those society had deemed unmarriageable, unsuitable, unworthy. Women with scars, physical or otherwise. Women who had been hidden, dismissed, overlooked. Diana had used her new status quietly but effectively, reaching out through Mrs. Dawson's network of governesses and housekeepers, finding the invisible girls and bringing them into visibility. "You are not broken," she told them over tea and cakes in the blue drawing room. "You are not mistakes. You are not charity cases. You are simply people who have survived things that left marks. And marks are not shameful. They are proof of survival." She established a fund, discreetly managed, carefully invested, to provide dowries and education for women whom families had abandoned or hidden. To give them choices beyond invisibility or dependence. Adrian watched from the doorway, his heart full to bursting with pride for this extraordinary woman he had married. Later, after the guests had departed, he found Diana in the library. Their library now, filled with books they had collected together. She stood by the window, watching the sun set over London, the light catching the ring on her finger. "Satisfied with your afternoon?" He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I think so." She leaned back against him. "Is it wrong that I want to help them? That I see their invisibility and remember my own?" "It is not wrong. It is precisely right." He pressed a kiss to her temple, then to her scarred cheek, a gesture that had become ritual between them, his way of honoring what she had survived. "You are turning your pain into purpose. Thomas would have loved you for that." Diana turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over someone more suitable?" "Never." The word came instantly, without hesitation. "You are the most suitable woman in England, because you are the only one who suits me. We are both scarred, you and I, both damaged by things beyond our control. But we see each other clearly anyway. That is rarer than gold, Diana. I love you." The words still felt new on her tongue, still carried the weight of miracle. "And I love you. Scars and all. Especially scars and all." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had been told they were not enough, who had found in each other the wholeness the world had insisted they lacked. In the months and years that followed, Diana's teas became something of an institution. The Duchess of Ashford's salon, where women's society had discarded, found community and purpose. Where scars were not hidden but honored. Where perfection was revealed as the lie it had always been. And truth, messy, complicated, beautiful truth, was celebrated. Lady Margaret wrote exactly once. A letter requesting financial assistance after Lord Hartwell's death left them in reduced circumstances. Diana sent money. She was not cruel, but she did not invite her mother to Ashford Hall. Some wounds, she had learned, were better honored from a distance. Rosalind, surprisingly, became an ally. She visited London, apologized for her complicity in Diana's mistreatment, and confessed that being the perfect daughter had been its own cage. She married a kind country vicar and wrote letters to Diana filled with real affection and hard-won understanding. But the greatest miracle, the one Diana returned to again and again in moments of doubt, was simply this: she was seen. Not as damaged or flawed or shameful, not as a charity case or a project or an eccentricity, but as Diana Blackwood, Duchess of Ashford, a woman of intelligence and strength, a woman who had survived attempts to erase her and had emerged not just intact, but extraordinary. On winter mornings, she still rose before dawn, but now Adrian rose with her, and together they walked the gardens of Ashford Hall, feeding birds that had learned to expect them. Milton had not survived the journey to London, but other birds, other wounded, persistent creatures, had taken his place. "Do you remember?" Diana said one such morning, her breath misting in the cold air. "The first time we met? When you said scars tell stories of survival?" "I remember." Adrian's arm tightened around her waist. "I remember thinking you were the most honest person I had ever met, the most real. I remember thinking you were mad. A duke who would speak to someone like me. I was mad, still am. Mad enough to see past society's carefully constructed lies. Mad enough to recognize truth when it stood before me, feeding birds in a garden at dawn." Diana turned to face him, cupping his scarred face in her hands. For he carried marks too, though his were less visible. Wounds of grief and guilt and war that she had learned to honor, just as he honored hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me believe I was worth choosing. You were always worth choosing, love. I simply had the wisdom to recognize it." They kissed as the sun rose over Ashford Hall. Two scarred souls who had found in each other not perfection, but something infinitely more valuable: acceptance, understanding, and love that asked nothing but truth. And in the garden around them, the birds began their morning songs, hymns to survival, to persistence, to the stubborn courage of creatures who refuse to accept that brokenness is the end of the story. For Diana Blackwood, Duchess of Ashford, it had never been the end. It had always been the beginning.